His bag that's in the back of my pickup.
Till 3:30.
Tim, if you don't mind, if you could go on mute, just so we don't hear something we're not supposed to hear.
Called out.
Does that mean you're muted?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give just a couple minutes to allow folks to come online. We had about 40 people who registered for the webinar, so hopefully we'll get a few more people. And just for your information, we are going to be recording the webinar for those who were not able to attend today, and we'll be posting it and sharing a link to that once that recording is available, so you can spread the word that way as well. All right. Well, it is after 3 o'clock, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. and we'll go ahead and get started. So I'm Cassie Chahan. I'm a special project manager with Fresno Irrigation District, and I'm also the North Kings Groundwater Sustainability Agency's executive director. And so I am hosting the webinar today, but we have assembled an expert panel to answer all of your questions about a new program coming to FID landowners through the NRCS, and it's specifically a groundwater recharge pilot program. And so we have Wendy Rash with NRCS to talk to us about that particular program and all of the specifics that go along with how do you submit an application, how do you become eligible, timelines, all of those things Wendy will spend time going over. And then we have some bonus content because we have a captive audience. We have FID's Assistant General Manager of Operations, Adam Clays, who will be joining us to provide just a brief water conditions update, lots of water, lots of recharge opportunity, and some special requests regarding this upcoming irrigation season. So we're excited to have you all join us today, and just to try to create a distraction-free environment. If you're not speaking, if you could please mute your phones, that will help us have a good, clean recording for our friends who weren't able to join us today, and also minimize distractions for our presenters. Also, in regards to the content, we are recording today's webinar, and we will be posting a copy of the webinar and the slides from today on our webpage that includes information on this particular pilot program. So we will spread the word on those resources and how to access those after today's webinar. So without further ado, again, I just want to thank you for carving out some time in your busy schedules to join us today to learn more about this program that FID is excited to be engaged in and have available for our landowners. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Wendy at this time.
Okay. I think you might have to invite me to share my screen.
I will do that now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us on, well, it's rainy here where I am. Probably raining where you are as well.
Mm-hmm.
We just had a very exciting little thunder shower. So that's something that doesn't happen every day.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Perfect.
And just real
Thank
quick,
you.
Wendy, before you get started, we will have plenty of time for questions. So we have about 20-25 minutes of content, and then Adam will give a brief update, and then we'll spend the last 20 minutes answering all of your questions, specifically on the grant program and or water conditions. So if you could try to hold your questions until then, Wendy will be able to stick around and answer all those questions after she gets done presenting the material. All right.
Great.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, thank you. My name's Wendy Rash. I am the water quality specialist for California for NRCS. And I've been helping to manage our pilot program for groundwater recharge. And I'm going to tell you about that today. We're expanding the pilot area into Fresno Irrigation District this year. But I'm going to give you a little background of what happened last year. So just to start off, in a big water year like we're having this year, these are the questions that come to mind. Can you take additional surface water after your ground's already wet? Do you have a place to put it that's safe for your crops, that's safe for your roads and your other infrastructure on the farm? Is your soil appropriate? Does it infiltrate heavy rains, or does the water pond on the soil surface and evaporate? Could you use more surface water instead of groundwater during the irrigation season? So there's a lot of different practices that you could use on the farm to try to capture water and get it into the ground, right? Like something as simple as trying to improve your soils so that they absorb and infiltrate water better. So just capturing that rainfall that actually falls right on your field. Then there's intentional flooding, using extra water in the winter and flooding your fields intentionally for recharge rather than for irrigation. Utilizing surface water instead of groundwater. So just avoiding the pumping of groundwater, and that's called in lieu recharge. And then last, you could take that extra water and instead of spreading it on a field where you have a crop, you could put it in a dedicated basin or a trench area in order to infiltrate it. And so these are the two practices that NRCS is piloting. So the intentional flooding of farm fields and the intentionally collecting that excess water in a basin or a trench. So we've developed two what we call practice standards, and right now they're interim practice standards, and we're testing them out in this pilot program. This is a map of the area where we are offering these practices. As an interim, we're testing them out. We have a limited amount of money to spend on them, and we also have a limited capacity to really manage and monitor what's going on with these projects. So we restricted it to a smaller area. But we are offering the practices through the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, which some of you may already be familiar with that program. So it's our sort of our standard financial assistance cost sharing program. So here's just a brief description of what the practices are. The recharge basin or trench is a more or less permanent feature. We require that it be in place for 15 years, and it's land that's dedicated to recharge. It's not cropped, so it could be a ditch, it could be like a widened ditch, it could be some other corner of the property where you could build a small basin and infiltrate water. And on-farm recharge is just that. It's where recharge is happening at the same time that you're growing crops. Here's an example of what a recharge trench might look like. This is an irrigation reservoir running in between two fields. It's long and narrow, but if the soil conditions are right, it could be an infiltration basin. And another example, this is a project that actually went forward this year under our first year of the pilot program, is on-farm recharge on a farm where they were planning to pull the walnut orchard and replant it. They couldn't flood irrigate effectively on that orchard because of some deep ripping that had happened previously, and so they couldn't get the water to push across the field, basically. And the walnut trees were ready to be refreshed. So their plan was to keep that field open for a couple of years in between taking the orchard out and then replanting it. But they also wanted to design the orchard to be able to take recharge water. So after removing the orchard, they did some land leveling. They also put in pipes and pumps to facilitate flood irrigation, even though they are going to be using micro sprinklers on the trees themselves, just to enable this field to be flexible and to allow recharge to happen. So here's some pictures of that orchard being pulled out and being recycled. It's that whole orchard recycling going on there. Spreading the chips and leveling that field. And then this third picture there of laying out the pipe that's going to be used to bring water for flood. And here's a picture of the recharge that was happening in early February. There was a barley crop planted and they applied recharge water. This is in Madera, so they were offering water, I think about the same time that Fresno was offering water in late January, early February. So you can see the alfalfa riser there in the foreground and pushing water across those checks. So again, our Recharge pilot program, our goal with this program is to field test our interim practice standards. Last fiscal year, we had about $1.4 million in projects in a limited area. So again, Fresno was not included, but those other areas that you saw were included last year. We do have some extra requirements on our pilot projects because we are trying to monitor the results. We ask folks to let us use a well that's near the site where you're doing recharge so that we can measure well levels and also take some water samples for water quality. And we're working with the irrigation districts specifically so that there's an assured water source. So the district has agreed that they are going to be providing water when it's available in the winter. So the district will have some details about that, about how to coordinate with them for getting the water at the end. Our plans that we will pay for can also include supporting practices like inlets, outlets, structures to move the water. If pre-treatment of the water is needed, we could do sediment basins, things like that. And then land shaping if that's needed for the on-farm recharge. So again, these are conservation practices that we can incorporate into your plan, and we can also help pay for them through the EQIP program. This is what the financial assistance looks like for the recharge practices themselves. The trench and basin practices are paid by the excavation. So they're paid by for the basins, it's the storage capacity of that basin. And you can see it's right around $4,000 per acre foot of storage capacity. And then the trench is paid by the cubic yards that are excavated to build that trench. And then the on-farm recharge is right around $100 an acre, depending on the size of the field where you're going to apply the water. Our engineering staff will help with the designs for the basins and trenches if you don't have the capability to use an engineer. Our engineers will help out with that. So our last fiscal year, we did about 20 projects. We did several basins and trenches ranging from 1 acre foot of capacity up to 30 acre feet. So quite a range of those happening on farms, and also one with an irrigation district. We funded the excavation of the basin, and then also these types of practices that go along with it: flow meters, pipes, valves, berms, riprap to protect the inlet, those kinds of things. On farm recharge, we had about 16 or 17 projects over 3,000 acres of recharge area. And we fund that management practice. So you're going to be spending time going out there and managing flood irrigation while it's raining. So I've heard from farmers it's not fun. So hopefully that financial assistance helps offset the cost of that management. And also items like flow meters, pipes, valves, and berms. So the way that we selected the sites within the pilot program, we were looking for areas that really had the capability to infiltrate water well and get it down into the water table. So we used a couple of screening tools. The first one was the SAGB. I don't know if you all have heard of this, but it's the Soil Agricultural Groundwater Banking Index. Let me see. Here we go, pointer, there we go. So SAGB for short, and that uses soil information, so down to about 60 inches, which is where the soil survey goes. That's the depth of the soil survey. And it takes soil characteristics and just ranks them based on how well water can percolate through that soil. And then the second one is this groundwater recharge assessment tool, which is the same idea, but it's looking at deeper levels of geology under that 60 inches of soil. So it goes down to about 100 or 120 feet. And it has a similar rating class to the SAGB. So excellent all the way down to very poor. This year, we're really focusing on trying to get projects that have that are in these top 3 categories on both the SAGB, and then this is a view of the land IQ or the groundwater recharge suitability, the GRAT layer. So excellent, good, and moderately good. So we really want to focus on those areas that have a good chance of moving that water into the water table. There is some error and variability with these, and we do work with farmers who are like, I think those assessments are wrong because my ground really percolates really well. We'll work with you on that. We will look at the data that you have or the observations that you have that might be different than what we see in those evaluations. So what did farmers do this year? Again, we want to protect water quality with these projects. So we did look at each participants nutrient management and pest management plans to make sure that it was unlikely that we would be pushing nutrients, nitrate especially, down into the water table, and looked at pesticides that were being used just on their likelihood of being leached into the groundwater, of moving with the water into the groundwater table. So we want to avoid those negative effects. We helped farms with the plans for setting up their field for flooding. So we can sit and also considering the impacts to the crop. So you may have a crop like almonds that is flowering early and you're getting started on cultural practices pretty early in the season. And so a crop like that, you probably don't want to flood later into the spring, right? Whereas grapes, maybe you can flood a little later because bud break is later. So those kinds of agronomic and cultural practice considerations we sort of worked into the plan. Whoops. And we just required that you put water on at least once in the winter. And we tried to put some flexibility into our contracts and to put 1 or 2 flood events in a 3-year contract. So if we hit a dry year, we just roll that over into the next year and keep our fingers crossed that the next year will be wet and we can actually do the recharge. For basins, same thing. We looked at the site history to make sure that we weren't putting a basin in where there used to be manure storage or something like that that would cause water quality problems. Making sure that the water rights are there to take the water for storage. And we're only working on cropland and sort of like headquarters associated land. We're not working on rangelands or pasture lands right now. And then we set up a plan again. How are we going to get the water to the site? What kind of structures do we need to move it there or to measure as we're moving it? And then again, we pay for the basins once they're constructed and complete. We pay for that practice. So you don't have to actually put the water in if it's a dry year. We pay you for the construction on those. We're also doing some monitoring, looking at those nearby wells for both well levels and taking a water quality, just a water sample for nitrates and for total dissolved solids, which is basically salinity, just to see what we can see in terms of effects of the recharge. We're about to go do our post monitoring. We seem to keep picking the rainy days. We're about to go later this week and do some more monitoring on our sites. So again, we've reopened the pilot program. Please contact the local NRCS office for an application. Fresno area is added, so work with the folks there in Fresno. I think they're on the line here. Maybe when we do Q&A, they could come on and introduce themselves. And then also confirm with the irrigation district about just making sure that your location, your turnout is likely to be charged when there is excess water and that you could get a delivery of that water. Here's our timeline. Our application period is open right now. The application form is due on April 3rd, and that's really just getting your name on the list. Okay, so there's this application form, the form 1200 is pretty simple. It's your name, your operation, a little bit about your location, and then after that's in, once that's in on April 3rd, then we can work with you on planning your project. Okay, so we look at your site suitability and how are we going to set up your field for recharge. We'll do the ranking in June, and then we'll select projects after July 1st. So these are projects that will be recharging next winter. Okay, so this is not, we're the government, we don't work very fast. Unfortunately, these contracting processes take a little while. So we will not be writing these contracts in order to recharge right now. That is it for my presentation, and I will be available to answer questions at the end.
Thank you, Wendy. And just a couple of things I wanted to add or emphasize before we get into the water supply update. I can tell you on the SAGB criteria in general, every location within FID's boundary is going to qualify under the SAGB index because we have very good soil conditions for groundwater recharge. So don't let that scare you. I see few folks from Consolidated. They have probably some of the best soil conditions in the entire state for groundwater recharge. So we're blessed with that. We're blessed with a really abundant water supply this year. And to the point that Wendy was making about the applications being for next year's projects, we may be starting next year very early in terms of having water available for on-farm recharge. So don't let that deter you, I guess, is the take-home message, because there could be a lot of opportunity come, October, November, December timeframe for on-farm recharge. So with that, unfortunately, Adam is tied up in a special board meeting that FID is having, but I'm going to go ahead and just flip through a few slides, and I'm going to give you a brief update. And then I want to talk a little bit about the coordination piece, because the last thing that we want to happen is for you all to get too far down this path only to find out that FID can't, or you're not eligible to receive surface water. So we want to try to head that off up front and have a mechanism in place to be able to help you with that particular piece. And so for let me just see here, sorry. For water conditions, the bottom line is I'm not sure how much information we need to share other than we have a lot of water. And you can see on the map, we're 268% of April 1st average based on the latest results in the map that you're seeing on the screen for those who are watching on the screen. So we do have a lot of water. We are above average over the last several months in terms of precipitation. And this is great, because at the end of December, it wasn't looking so great. And then we ended up having a lot of precipitation and wanted to be able to take advantage of that precipitation and of what's shaping up to be one of the wettest, probably the wettest water year in history. We are projecting that we will have about 4.5 million acre feet of runoff available between October and September. So this is why I don't want you to be discouraged, because there's a lot of water and we want to be able to position ourselves to take advantage of that supply and expand the recharge efforts that the district's already doing through its 890 acres of basins onto individual farms that are located within FID's boundaries. So we're extremely pleased to be included. We did offer some on-farm recharge deliveries specifically in response to the historic water events that we were having in late December, early January. That program was fairly short, and we are looking to expand on that moving forward. Right now, there's a lot of water, as I keep saying, but not a whole lot of demand. So there still remains the opportunity for you to take water, for those who are able to, for on-farm recharge purposes. And this is just a site, a map that shows those particular areas that were taking water during that kind of trial on-farm recharge program that we ran earlier this year. So one of the other things that I just wanted to cover, and sorry, the slides got a little bit out of order, is this upcoming irrigation season. Once the rains stop and we are actively irrigating, we are encouraging our growers to use surface water to the extent possible. It just makes sense. If you have flood irrigation lines, use flood irrigation lines and take the surface water if at all possible. I understand that isn't always the preferred method, and it's a little bit of a pivot from when we talk about conserving as much water as possible during the drier periods, but this year that's not the case. So we're trying to encourage the use of surface water and your flood irrigation lines. In terms of the application process that Wendy outlined and that we are hoping that you all will apply for, one of those criteria that Wendy mentioned is coordination with the district. So if you are interested in this program, please do not hesitate to contact our office. And obviously, if you've done on-farm recharge before, you may already know the answer that you're eligible because we've given you on-farm recharge deliveries prior. But if you're not sure and you're maybe off of a smaller system or a private lateral, contact our office and talk to our water master. We have a new water master at FID. His name is David Burrow. And you can call the front desk 233-7161, ask to speak to Dave, and he will help walk you through that process and whether or not, if you're approved and you have a program in place, a project in place, whether or not FID can meet its requirement to deliver surface water to you. And you can answer that question way up front before you go through a long application process of working with the team from NRCS. So I encourage you to do that as soon as possible. Lastly, before we open it up to questions, I did work with our consultants. We have a lot of information on our website. You probably have gotten some emails related to this particular program. We do have the application linked on our website, so you can take a look at that and start to answer any questions that you have. And then definitely we'll invite at this time the Fresno field office folks to pop on and introduce themselves if you would like. And this way you know who you're talking to if you need additional assistance on completing your application. So if our friends from the Fresno Farm Service office would like to pop on, we will stop sharing the screen here and maybe you can introduce yourself. Anyone? Maybe not. All right, they're shy, they're camera shy, but nonetheless, you have their number. They're at 276-7404, and you can contact them if once you see that application, you have questions, or if you need a copy of the application, you can contact them directly. So Wendy, maybe I'll invite you to come back on screen if you're still there, and we can open it up to questions that we do have one in the chat. Maybe we'll start there, and you do not have to type your questions in the chat. If you have a question, go ahead and either raise your hand and we'll get to you, or you can just speak up and we'll get to you that way. The first question though is there a funding limit per entity or per parcel for this program?
The funding limit per entity is the same as our regular EQIP program. So over the 5 years of the Farm Bill, I believe you can receive up to $500,000 from EQIP. So we're not going to get there. There is no limit per parcel, but our payment rates are based on acreage. So that's going to naturally limit what that payment looks like for each area.
Thank you. What other questions do we have? We went through that information very quickly, so we have plenty of time for questions. I did, maybe while our shy guests are thinking of their questions that they can ask, I did receive one application in our office, so there's definitely interest, and I was not here, otherwise I would have probably routed them directly to our Fresno service center.
Yeah.
But that application came in almost immediately after the information went out on it being available. So I do think that there's interest, and the district is definitely encouraging flood irrigation. And in the flyer that I showed earlier during the presentation, we talked about looking for some grant programs that would help to offset the costs associated with this. So happy to, again, have that available through NRCS. So we do have another question. Does the applicant need to be the landowner, or can it be property operator, i.e. leased or managed parcels?
Great question. It can be either one. So it can be the landowner or the operator for a leased operation. We just, for a leasee, we basically just look at a copy of your lease and confirm that you have control of that land for the life of our contract, which for this would be maximum of 3 years. What else was I going to say about that? Oh, the other thing that sometimes folks get hung up on is the adjusted gross income limit, which for our EQIP program, if your average adjusted gross income for the 3 previous years was over $900,000, then you do not qualify for EQIP. So that is sometimes a consideration in which entity wants to apply, whether it's the operator or the landowner.
That's good. Thank you for that. Oh, we have someone that has a hand up. Rich Franco, did you have a question?
Yes, on that, what you just mentioned there, the max, it's a maximum of 3 years for this program.
Yeah, during the
Still,
pilot program, we're trying to keep our contracts short. It doesn't mean that you couldn't reapply in the future, but we're trying to keep it short for the pilot program because we're just doing some monitoring and trying to get our feedback back to our national office so that we can get these adopted permanently. So yeah, we're trying to keep them a little short and sweet.
gotcha.
So we have another question coming in it related to flow meters on the turnout. FID, most of the turnouts at the most of the district turnouts do not have flow meters. And so the question is, would flow meters need to be put in place as a condition of this program?
It's not a condition of the program. We like flow meters because they make it super easy to know how much water was applied, but they are not required. As long as there's a way to measure or at least estimate how much water is coming on, and maybe the district does that through their billing or through their releases. We are accepting district bills in Madera as a way to measure how much water was applied if there's no flow meter in place.
All right, so then another question is, someone just put in a flow meter and a booster pump. Would their funding be available for reimbursement?
Unfortunately, no. We cannot pay for things that were already installed before we had a contract. If you have another field where you're thinking about doing that kind of thing and you're willing to wait for a contract,
Hey,
then
John,
yes, it could be included.
you might want to listen to this. This is a conference that FID is having about the NRCS on-farm recharge.
It sure is, and we can hear you. If you could mute your phone.
We're getting some good feedback. So yeah, those are the flow meter and the pump are things that could potentially be included with a recharge contract, but we cannot pay for things that were installed before we have a contract.
Okay, and then now we have another question related to the intentional flooding program. Can you get paid for flooding your field, and how much? I think that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, so the on-farm recharge where you have a crop in the field, or maybe it's in between crops on an annual rotation, that payment is right around $100 an acre, and we pay for each time that you're able, well, we pay for by the season. So if you're able to flood during the winter season, we pay you that $100 an acre. Right now, we don't have the capability to pay you multiple times for multiple flooding events. So if you're able to recharge 3 times, we still only pay you $100 an acre. So that's a consideration going forward that we might be able to change in the future, but right now we're limited to paying for the season, basically, that you flood at least once during that winter season.
Okay, next question is, grapes are preferred over almonds since bud break is late, but non-bearing almonds or pistachios would be fine.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really up to the grower in terms of what you're comfortable with. So some folks, really push the envelope and they flood almonds after they've leafed out even. But it's really up to you and what your comfort level is on your crop. So yeah, young trees might be a good choice, especially if your soils are real sandy.
I know, Wendy, we had several people that came in a little bit late, so maybe you can just briefly go over, that timeline chart that you had. I think would be helpful.
Sure.
Maybe you
Yeah,
can show that. I
I
don't know if I need to
can.
invite you again.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, keep the questions coming. I just I had a couple people request a brief overview. I did link in the chat a direct link to our website, so you can go on the website as well or contact the farm office for additional information.
Okay. I'm not seeing the invite yet. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is the timeline. Again, the application period is open to April 3rd. And on April 3rd, we just need that 1200 form turned in to the field office. So that gets your name on the list. So you don't have to do anything except turn in that form and write on it that you're interested in the groundwater recharge program. So we'll work with you April up through June to come up with the plan for your fields, and maybe help you select which fields would be best on your operation if you've got choices, and then come up with those plans, and then we rank the plans in June, and then we award the funds after July 1st. And again, this would be a recharge that would be happening in the fall and winter of 23 to 24.
And don't be intimidated by the application. I know a lot of times applications can be overwhelming just in and of themselves. And so I was just going to show briefly the application just so you know that it's not anything that's super overwhelming. So just for your information, I mean, this is a 3-page application, but the last page is just a signature. So essentially, as Wendy mentioned, it's some very basic information and just giving the Farm Service Agency an indication that you are interested in the program. And then that essentially puts your placeholder in, and we can work on the details of, is water delivery possible? And then working through the Farm Service Center, we can develop the project, or they can help with development of the project. So if you're at all interested, I would encourage you to take a look at this. It is linked on our website, and or you can request it be emailed to you and get that going. April 3rd is not that far away, and so there's not a ton of time, but the good news is it's a fairly simple application process to get your placeholder in. And for those who joined late, I did mention that this year is a historic water year, so it's very likely that we will have water for on-farm deliveries, early in this water season next year. Next year's water year, as Wendy mentioned, the 23-24 water year that starts on October 1st. All right, so it looks like we have a few more questions. Will FID guarantee water availability during fall, winter 2023 for this program? What if water is not available during these months? Would other flood irrigation count during spring, summer 2023? So Laura, we can provide a direct response, but maybe start with your period, your 3-year period, and how, if it's a critically dry year, because we'd like to say we can guarantee the weather is going to cooperate and we'll have plenty of water like we do this year, but we know that's not the reality. So we're kind of subject to what we're dealt, and it sounds like NRCS recognizes that and has a method for dealing with those dry years.
And we are looking for the flood events to be something above and beyond a normal irrigation. So I would say that, what we're going to pay for is something that's different, than an irrigation. Either it's happening when your crop is not in the active growing stage, or it's an amount of water that's over and above what you would typically put on during an irrigation. And I see
And then,
another
yeah,
question. Yeah.
the next
On
question regarding nutrients. Yeah, so the question is, what are the nutrient pesticide requirements? Are there standards available for review?
There's not a requirement. What we have been doing is just taking a look at your irrigation and nitrogen management plan, which you have to do anyway for a regional board for irrigated lands, and just making sure that it looks reasonable, that you're not putting on so much nitrogen that we're afraid that there's going to be a lot of residual there at the end of the season that could get pushed down into the water table. And then we're also just taking a look at the pesticides that you typically use and doing a risk assessment on if those pesticides are likely to leach, and if they're being put on sort of towards the end of the season where they're still going to be around when you're doing that recharge. So it's really just kind of a risk assessment on the property. There's not really a requirement, but we try to work with you to reduce those risks.
All right, we have another question, and then I'd like to give Adam an opportunity to say a few words. Would you still qualify if you're recharging on land that has been fallowed?
Yes, as long as it's an agricultural use, like clearly it's in rotation with crops or something like that, yes, fallow land would qualify.
Or if you're taking it out of production for
Right.
recharge?
So if it's like a orchard replant and you're going to do some gap time in there as fallow, that would definitely qualify. Taking it out completely, that's not a situation we've encountered yet, so we might have to think a little bit about that. But as long as it's sort of clearly a land use, it should qualify.
And I assume, Laura, that Wendy, that those types of questions will be vetted through the application process, right? So
Yeah.
you put your application in. If you don't meet the April 3rd deadline, then you have to wait until next year to hope that FID gets included in the pilot area or there's a full-scale program. So if you have these questions and if the answer to these questions is to your satisfaction, you would be interested, then I would encourage you to go ahead and get your application in, and then all of these details can be worked out during that period where NRCS is very heavily involved in reviewing and developing those projects.
Absolutely.
So Adam, I would like to give you an opportunity. We did go through the abundant supply of water that we have this year and encouraging our growers to utilize flood irrigation and also utilize the surface water during this upcoming irrigation season. So definitely wanted to give you a chance to introduce yourself for those who may not know you, and also if you have a few words that you would like to say.
Sure. Yeah, apologize for being late. Our board meeting ran long, but my name is Adam Clays. I'm the Assistant General Manager of Operation for the Fresno Irrigation District. And I imagine Cassie probably flew over some slides I put in there that I was meant to cover that talked about the general water supply that we're looking at for this current year, which right now we're looking at probably being a record year on the Kings River as well as the San Joaquin. Those are two rivers here in the state that have benefited more than anywhere else in the state. We're expecting even more runoff out of the Kings or San Joaquin. Those are tied neck and neck than any other river in the state. Even the Lake Oroville watershed is a little trailing us a little bit. But basically, we're facing flood releases on the Kings River and San Joaquin River. They have very similar watersheds and runoff characteristics from now through at least June, probably into July. And right now, because it's raining and not too hot, we're struggling to find enough irrigation demand within FID to utilize this water. So Granted, the storm that's ending today, right now, there's not a lot forecasted into the future. There might be something middle of next week, but we're kind of hoping the rain is over so we can start using some of this flood water and actually have some demands within FID. To give you an idea, a day or two ago, we only had about 10 users district-wide taking water. To give you a comparison here, during like June and July, our peak summer hot months, we might have between 200 and 250 people on any given day taking water, turnouts, taking water. Right now, just 10. So lots of capacity. We would love to be able to deliver more water. I know most fields, though, if you're east of Fresno, Clovis, you probably all have private ponds right now. If you're west of town, you're recovering from rain and trying to get into your fields to do cultural practices. So we realize that's a challenge, but a lot of water be available. During June and July, those are our peak months. There's really not a lot of excess capacity to be able to do on-farm recharge, but in our shoulder months, so basically we call it shoulder months because it's when we don't have peak demand. So March, April, maybe the first part of May, and then maybe the last half of August, September, October. We're probably gonna be running water through those months, if not longer. Those months I just listed off, those are the months where we're going to have capacity to allow some extra surface water deliveries. And if you're used to using drip in lieu of surface water, just want to encourage you guys that of any year, this is the year to utilize your flood irrigation systems to take advantage of water. So we literally have it coming out of our ears, and we're trying to keep it within FID and our overall groundwater basin, because if we don't use it, the water is literally going out to the ocean as we speak, and more of it will be going out to the ocean. And just to give you perspective, I think most people are probably more familiar with Millerton Lake than Pine Flat Lake. So Millerton Lake is about 500,000 acre-feet in capacity. Between now and basically 3 or 4 months out, we're going to have to spill about 4 full Millerton Lakes worth of water. There's that much water coming out of the mountains, and we just don't have the demands for that. And a similar volume would be present on our Kings River system as well in the Pine Flats. So
A lot of water.
a lot of water right now. A lot of water.
Yeah. So that's a perfect segue, Adam, because we do have a question, and Wendy, I'll invite you back on, regarding NRCS funding to put a flood irrigation system on a current drip irrigated field. Is that an eligible project?
Yeah, so making the field capable of recharging. So if that means some reshaping, land planing, that kind of thing, pipeline. It might be a little tricky if you have an installed drip system just working around the system itself, making sure we're not ripping up your drip system in order to make the flood work. But yeah, we can work with you on that, just making that field ready for recharge. And recharge doesn't need to be as precise, I guess, as a regular flood irrigation system. So there may be ways that we can facilitate the recharge without doing a full-blown reshaping of everything.
Great. Any other questions anyone has? Otherwise, I will invite you to take a look at our website, invite you to contact the Fresno Service Office for additional information. But we'll hold on a few seconds for those last minute questions, if there are any. And maybe Wendy, do you have any statistics on, I know you showed some pictures of a project in Madera and some others, but do you have any statistics on how many applicants you got last year or last application cycle for, let's say, Madera or one of the other counties? Like, how popular is this particular program?
That's one reason why we did expand, is that we didn't utilize all the funding that we had available to us last year. So we had about 20 applicants, and we were able to put them all in the program. So we're hoping we can take advantage of all of our funds this year.
And is it divvied up by eligible entity? And I was going to say county, but it's really by district. So like, does Fresno
No.
Irrigation District have a set amount, or is it the whole entire program?
It's just the whole program, so everyone is sort of in the same pool, I guess, competing for the same funding. So, but unless we get just like a huge number, I feel like we're going to be able to accommodate most folks that have a good site. Most of the projects that did not make it into the program last year was really just because their site wouldn't work. So that's really our main consideration.
In terms of being able to get surface water to that site for the flood irrigation, or what was the whole?
Just not being feasible to get either to get the water there, or their soils and their hydrogeology didn't look good, or something like that, or they were outside of a district and they didn't have the correct water rights to be able to store the water. So those were the reasons why projects had to drop out.
Got it. Well, all of you in FID should not have those challenges. So hopefully you will get your applications in. And if there are any questions, Laura, I'm assuming we can share your PowerPoint. Is that acceptable? Yes. Okay, so we'll make sure and get that information on the website along with the recording from today's webinar. And again, if you're thinking about submitting your application for this program, you don't have to do it before, because I'm imagining one of the first things NRCS will check is whether or not the project would be eligible for surface water deliveries from FID. And so, don't let that be the holdup either. We can always check that after the fact, but I would encourage you to talk with our water master and just confirm, hey, I'm applying for this grant and to participate in this program. Would you be able to satisfy the requirement to get me surface water during the irrigation, or sorry, the non-irrigation, the flood irrigation season for on-farm recharge purposes? So if you need Dave's information, like I said, you can just call the main office and they will connect you with our water master, Dave Burrow. All right, well, I think we're out of questions. We were efficient today. We covered all of that in 53 minutes, so that's really good. And I just really appreciate all of you carving out some time of your busy day to meet with us and to learn more about this program. And thank you, Wendy, for including Fresno Irrigation District, and also for the information you shared today. If we get any questions coming through our office, we'll certainly route them back to you and to the Fresno service office.
That sounds great. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day. Stay safe. Bye.